Welcome back, everyone. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap expert, and in this video, I'm very excited to talk about the Detroit Pistons, the team with the most cap space this summer. They have over $60 million to spend, and I've been holding off on this one for a little while because we actually know what their plans are and how to spend it finally. So I'm going to get into some scenarios, show what their offseason could ultimately look like. But before I get into it, if you're new to the channel or have been here already, please like and subscribe, and let's get into some scenarios. So let's take a quick look at the Pistons cap sheet heading so far into the offseason. You can see this exact cap sheet on the Pistons page on capsheets.com if you want to take a closer look at it. So they currently have $95 million occupying their payroll. So at a minimum, they can generate about $45 million in cap space, which would require that they renounce all these free agent holds. So what all that means is to actually create this $45 million in cap space, they have to give up the rights to re-sign these players, which is expected, except for Simone Fontecchio. I think they're going to keep his rights on their books in that $5.2 million qualifying offer. I'll get a little more into that later. And as you can see, they can get to a maximum of about $68.5 million, that which would require them to cut some of their players that don't have guaranteed money. So that would mean declining the team options for Evan Fournier, Chimezie Metu, and Stanley Umude, and cutting the non-guaranteed salary of Troy Brown Jr. So here's a more simplified cap sheet showing how they got to their cap space. I removed all those players that don't have any guaranteed money, and then I went ahead and renounced all the free agent cap holds for all the players they don't plan on bringing back, except for Fontecchio's. And when you put all together, I project them with $64.4 million in cap space, which I think is going to be the most accurate number as we head into free agency next week. And they also have the $8 million room exception afterwards. So that's an exception that teams with cap space can use to spend on an additional free agent after they use up all their cap space. So they have a lot of spending power heading into the offseason. So the biggest thing, though, is that we finally got clarity on how they're going to use their cap space and go about their free agency. So the Pistons just had their intro presser for new president of basketball operations, Trajan Langdon, and he said that the plan on using their cap space to acquire unwanted contracts with assets attached, which if you're a Pistons fan, thank God, because they did not do this at all these past 4 years, and this is what they should have been doing. They just need to keep getting more assets, more likely draft picks when you take on these unwanted contracts. However, owner Tom Gores also added that they do want to bring in some veterans that can help out the team. So both these things can be accomplished. So I am gonna go out and mostly in my scenarios have them acquire these unwanted salaries with draft pick, but also try to get guys that can actually help. And before I get into scenarios, I just want to quickly touch on the draft because there's already a good amount of reporting suggesting what the Pistons may do with the fifth overall selection, which might be selecting Matas Buzelis. So this is from ESPN's most recent mock draft, and it says that rival teams have largely viewed Detroit as his likely landing spot. At this point, the Pistons haven't worked out other players who are ticketed for the high lottery, contributing to the idea that Detroit is the probable floor for him, and also as that their interest in him predated the hiring of Trajan Langdon. So I just bring this up because he is a wing. He could be a 3 or 4, which could play into the roster building a little bit, but I don't think it's going to necessarily stop them from bringing another forward. You can never have too many wings. And then there's this from Mark Stein in his Substack. Make sure you subscribe to that. There's a lot of good intel coming at this time of year. And just make some more connections with Buzelis, saying he could go as high as number 5 for the Pistons. And also brings up how his father knows Jonas Valanciunas, who just played for the Pelicans, and that they're also both Lithuanian heritage, and that they are both repped by XL Sports. And I bring this up not just because there's more smoke to this Buzelis potential selection, but also because there's a lot of Pelicans connections going on. Mainly that Trajan Langdon, he was most recently an executive for the Pelicans who took over the Pistons, and he also brought another executive from the Pelicans. His name is Michael Blackstone, and a highly regarded assistant coach named Fred Vinson. And that might not be the end of it, because the Pistons are also linked to potentially hire James Borrego as their head coach, who just was an assistant with the Pelicans. And now we're getting this Jonas Valanciunas connection. I don't think he's going to be back with the Pelicans, but he just recently played there. Could he be a Pistons target? Maybe that kind of makes some sense. I could see it happening. But with all these Pistons Pelicans connections going on, I do get the feeling that maybe they'll work out a trade this offseason. So a couple weeks ago, I did my Pelicans offseason video. You should check that out if you haven't already. And I discussed the possibility of the Pelicans maybe looking to trade CJ McCollum because they're reportedly looking at upgrades at point guard. And if they do, they're probably going to want to move on from McCollum. He's got 2 years, $60 million left on his deal. And when I was kind of looking around to see who might be interested, it was hard for me to identify teams that might have an appetite in taking that deal. But one of the teams I did come up with were the Pistons because they have all this cap space and Trajan Langdon just got hired. Maybe there could be some interest there with that connection. Then recently on the Dunked On podcast, Nate Duncan brought up a similar idea where they swap Isaiah Stewart, who could be a little superfluous going forward if they get another center potentially, for CJ McCollum. And I really like that idea. I like the idea of Isaiah Stewart on the Pelicans. I think he could be a pretty good fit there, whether he starts or comes off the bench. So I went ahead and swapped them. I took out Isaiah Stewart, put in CJ McCollum. The Pistons can do an inbounds trade, taking in McCollum's money because they have all this extra cap space. And I went ahead and had the Pelicans throw in the 21st pick in this year's draft. I think they're going to have to throw in a little something extra for the Pistons taking in the additional money left on McCollum's deal. So here, the Pistons get an asset. They get a first round pick and they get a very good player in CJ McCollum who should help them a lot on the court and bring some much needed veteran leadership for this very young Pistons team. And they're not done yet. They can still spend an additional $41 million after. Keep in mind, I guarantee Troy Brown Jr. just because for what I have left to do, he's going to be able to fit. But yeah, they have all this cap space. So okay, let's go and make some more trades. Next, I had them acquire Tim Hardaway Jr. from the Mavericks, who they're reportedly looking to trade. They want to get off his $16.2 million salary so they can clear enough space below the first apron and re-sign Derrick Jones Jr. So I have the Mavs sending out a 2025 first round pick, so a future pick in the following year, along with Tim Hardaway Jr. in exchange for Quentin Grimes, who was acquired by the Pistons in the trade deadline by the previous regime, and he might not get to play under this Pistons team I put together that now has CJ McCollum. A lot of guards there. And this now gives the Mavs the flexibility to go ahead and continue with their plans, and the Pistons have about $29 million left to spend. So let's keep going. Now here comes a big trade I made with the Chicago Bulls. It involves draft picks, so it can be agreed to on draft night, but it wouldn't be executed until July once the Pistons have their cap space. And that's because I have them use their remaining cap space to absorb Lonzo Ball and Javon Carter. I have them take them off the Bulls books, who need to shed some payroll. I think they want to get off Lonzo Ball's salary now that he's expiring and just create some more flexibility so they can bring back DeMar DeRozan, Patrick Williams, and maybe bring in some more players to improve the team. So in exchange for that, I had the Bulls trade the number 11 pick to Detroit in exchange for the 21st overall pick that the Pistons had getting from the Pelicans earlier. And this all barely fits within the Pistons cap space while factoring in Simone Fontecchio and re-signing him later. So they're essentially capped out, but they're not theoretically done yet. They could still do some more moves. That's because with all these moves I just did, they still finish just below the salary cap. And that means that all these players that the Pistons just acquired, they like mainly the expiring players, they can immediately be reaggregated in trades. Whenever a team acquires a player with cap space and they remain under the cap following that specific trade, those players can then be combined immediately with other players to acquire more expensive players. And that's great for the Pistons because they can keep making more trades. They can theoretically combine all these guys, Tim Hardaway Jr. with Javon Carter and Troy Brown, just to name a few, and further increase payroll and trades and get more assets. Now, while the Pistons can make some more trades beyond this point, I'm not going to do that or else this video can just take forever. So I went ahead and called it an offseason and filled out the rest of the roster. So the first thing I did was re-sign Simone Fontecchio. I re-signed him to the maximum amount that the Pistons can give him using his early bird rights. It's projected at 4 years, $58 million, and it would start at just under $13 million. He might not get the full amount, but I could see him getting pretty close to that maximum amount that the Pistons can give him. Then I re-signed Jonas Valanciunas using the $8 million room mid-level exception. This is the type of scenario I could see happening if Valanciunas doesn't have any offers in like the non-taxpayer mid-level exception range around that starts at 13 million. If he can't get anything better than that, I could see him very well taking the room mid-level with the Pistons and being their primary backup center. And then when you put it all together, they have a 14-man roster, and they are roughly $15 million below the $171 million luxury tax line. Whatever they end up doing this offseason, they are not going to want to exceed this amount for any reason. And that's still plenty of flexibility below that line for them to increase payroll with further trades. And as far as Lonzo Ball, it's probably the end of the line for him as far as like additional trades go this year. Once he gets traded, I'm sure he's probably going to get bought out by the Pistons at some point. But all the other players that they acquire, like that are expiring money, I'm sure they can get flipped around pretty easily. So there you go. This is the type of way I could see the Pistons using their cap space this summer. And even if you don't think that the roster is significantly better with the moves I made, I truly think that they are a coaching change away to getting to around 30 wins next season. I think the talent has been there, and they just need a little more shooting, which I did bring with CJ McCollum and Tim Hardaway Jr., and they just need the right coach to put it all together.